prayers to be said by the Reverend Peter Mackenzie.
A reading from Paul's letter to the Philippians. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. In a moment of silence, let's call to mind all those things that we most appreciate about this borough. Almighty Creator, we give you thanks for this beautiful borough and its people, all of whom you love, from Heathrow to Harefield, from Uxbridge to Yedding. For the life we share, for the laws which protect us and guard our freedom, for the courtesies which enhance our lives and the friendships which support us, may God be praised. For men and women of principle and courage, for those whose vigilance protects our freedom and whose protest guards our corporate conscience, may God be praised. For those who support charities and hospitals, places of learning and libraries, for all those who work to make this a better place to live, work and study, may God be praised. For those who by their enterprise and efforts have created employment and enhanced our environment. For the great diversity of peoples and races who have enriched the life of the community in succeeding generations, may God be praised. For those who look to the living God as their inspiration, whose presence and example have enhanced our corporate life and strengthened love, truth, peace and justice in our midst, may God be praised. And for those who from a variety of faiths and beliefs have endeavoured to influence the life of this borough in order that we may understand our differences and share our common convictions, may God be praised. And so we ask God's blessing on this meeting. Almighty and eternal God, to whom we must all give account, guide with your Spirit all the councillors and officers of the London Borough of Hillingdon, that they may serve in public office with the wisdom to know what is right, the courage to choose it, the strength to work for it, and the patience and perseverance to see it to fruition, for the common good, that its citizens may flourish and go forward with unity. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Please be seated. Good evening. Item number 1, apologies for absence.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Good evening, members of the Council, colleagues and members of the public. We have a number of apologies from Councillors Rita Chamdell, Roy Chamdell, Gardner, Hagger, Lackmana and Money.
Thank you. Item 2, minutes. To receive the minutes of the meetings of the Council held on 16th January 2025. All agreed? Thank you. Item 3, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest?
Madam Mayor, I will need to declare a non-pecuniary interest in item 5, little 3.
Item 4. Oh, it's me. Here is a summary, good evening again, and here's a summary of events I've had the pleasure to attend. I attended the Forget-Me-Not FC Dementia Friends Christmas lunch. There was a real party atmosphere with lots of singing and dancing. Not only was I presented with a cheque from the Amblers Walking FC for my charities, but I also received an offer of marriage. Invitations next week. I was invited to the first ever Hillingdon Business Awards evening and was delighted to present an award to the winners of the Charity and Social Enterprise of the Year Community Connects, a charity which supports adults and young people with learning difficulties. It has been wonderful to welcome to the Mayor's Parlour, Lady Banks School Youth Council, students from Brunel Ready Programme, Minute Junior Schools Student Council, Brunel University Students' Union, and students from the Safer Transport. I attended the 10th anniversary event of Mini Steps Nursery. This nursery was opened in 2015 by Catherine Dan, who was the mayor at the time, and I was delighted as the current mayor to wish Mini Steps a very happy 10th birthday on reaching this special milestone. I thoroughly enjoyed the Tula Talent Show, which encompassed a range of musical and dance performances from children aged from 5 to 17 years. It was also a pleasure to attend the Mosaic show, which showcased upcoming events at the Campus Theatre. It comes as no surprise to the variety of talent we have in our borough, and it was wonderful to be in the audience to hear a violin solo by a young student from Breakspear School. There was singing, puppeteers, a scene from Death of a Salesman, and a dance troupe from 17 to 14-year-olds dancing to the Spice Girls. Tell me what you want, what you really, really want. A joy to watch. I attended an event at the Crown and Treaty pub to an historical talk and an unveiling of a painting of the Treaty House in Uxbridge, which was kindly donated to the borough. On a point of interest, the ornate wood panelling in the treaty room was bought by an American and shipped to the US. Evidently, the gentleman in question had a pang of conscience and returned the wood panelling during the late Queen's coronation. The wood panelling once again adorns the treaty room walls and is the property of the sovereign and not the Crown and Treaty pub. I was invited to the Macmillan World Cancer Day Mad Hatters Tea Party and was delighted to celebrate with volunteers the amazing work Macmillan have carried out over the past 115 years. It was a pleasure to attend the Family Roadshow at Ruislip Manor Library and to witness firsthand the various activities available to young children, free activities available for the under fives, and the Families Information Service, including the NHS. I thoroughly enjoyed the event, which was very informative, and my congratulations to everyone who contributed to help to make the day such a resounding success. Well done. It was lovely to meet the Milan ladies group joining in a game of bingo, lots of dancing and singing. What a lovely way to spend an afternoon. My thanks to Councillor Lakmana for inviting me and the volunteers for all your hard work in helping to make this ladies group such a success. It was a pleasure to be part of the opening of Youth Offer, which supports personal, social and educational development and offers a wide range of activities, including music, sports, cooking and other activities. It was lovely to hear several young people speak so passionately about their achievements, their goals and how the offer has supported and benefited them. My thanks to Councillor O'Brien and Councillor Sweeting for their support. I had the pleasure of opening Vision Plus Opticians and the Tikka Nation Indian restaurant in Ruislip Manor. Finally, I was honoured to represent the borough at several civic events, and on Monday, the flag of Ukraine was raised outside the Civic Centre to mark the 3rd anniversary of the war and to honor the people of Ukraine. A minute's silence was observed after the flag was raised. I would like to leave you with this thought. One of the marvelous things about a community is that it enables us to welcome and help people in a way we couldn't as individuals. Thank you. Item 5, Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The Head of Democratic Services report is in 4 parts. The first part, which members are asked to note, relate to the 3 urgent decisions, all building related, taken since the last council meeting. The urgency was to secure funding or to keep programmes on track. The second item is for noting, and it is an amendment of cabinet portfolios, and it is quite simply a simplification of the decision making, removing the requirement for the leader of the council to also agree property rent reviews. The third is for the council to agree, and that is the appointment of statutory officers following an unforeseen departure of the former head of legal services, revert to the head of the democratic services as the monitoring officer, and to note that Daniel Toohey is appointed the interim head of legal services. The fourth item, also for agreement, concerns the members' allowances for next year, 2025-2026, which we are proposing are frozen. And for the sake of clarity, that means there will be no uplift in line with the staff pay award for that year. I so move those recommendations. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Is there a seconder?
Madam Mayor, I second and reserve my right.
Are there any other speakers? Thank you. Yeah. Yes, is that agreed? Yeah, I was just about... Councillor Tuckwell.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This agenda item this evening considers the adoption by full council of the revised local development scheme as recommended by Cabinet on the 13th of February. The local development scheme sets out the timescales for producing key local planning documents, ensuring that our planning framework remains up to date and legally compliant. Following the Deputy Prime Minister's announcement in December 2024, all local planning authorities are required to update their local development schemes within 12 weeks of the revised National Planning Policy Framework. This update aligns Hillingdon with that directive and provides a clear, structured timetable for delivering our local plan. With that, I move the 2 recommendations in the agenda.
Is there a seconder?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I second and reserve my rights. Thank you.
Are there any other speakers? Is that agreed? Item 7. Oh, sorry, Councillor Mills.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I wish to move the suspension of Council Procedure Rule 14.4 to allow the mover and seconder of the motion unlimited speaking time this evening.
Is there a seconder?
Madam Mayor, I second that.
Are there any other speakers? Is that agreed? Councillor Goddard.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Hillingdon is committed to providing comprehensive and high-quality services to its residents at the lowest possible cost. That isn't a new pledge, this is a continuation of our deal for residents, which we've offered for many years. However, I must make it absolutely clear that we face serious financial challenges in preparing and delivering our budget for the next fiscal year and for the medium-term financial strategy that accompanies it. Our greatest challenge is sustaining our strategy of high-quality services and low cost to residents in a national environment of ever-increasing costs and comparatively stagnant income. Madam Mayor, 24-25 has been a very difficult year for this authority, as we entered the year with inexperienced and underperforming senior financial management, expenditure pressures, and a state of transition of key financial systems which stretched our control infrastructure to its very limits. This has caused us to make significant changes within our senior financial management team, including the appointment of a new Section 151 officer. These issues have quite correctly been referred to by both external and internal auditors in their reports. And indeed, they've also been referenced by the Council's new Section 151 officer in his Section 25 report. Given this authority's commitment to strong financial management, I have made a formal request to the Section 151 officer that he embarks on a process of remediation in order to re-establish strong and fit-for-purpose financial governance and controls. Madam Mayor, I must also draw members' attention to the Section 25 report, which our Section 151 officer is required to provide in respect of this budget and our overall financial position. He is required by law to comment on the adequacy or otherwise of our reserves and whether or not, in his opinion, the budget is robust. I must emphasise that the requirement for the Section 151 officer to arrive independently at his opinion is absolute, and that neither I nor any other member of the Cabinet have sought to influence this or indeed the comments that he has made in any way. He has expressed the view that the optimum range of reserves and balances for an authority of Hillingdon's size and with its scale of operation should be between £32 million and £57.5 million. However, his overall conclusions are that our current reserves position is adequate, but that the budget is not sufficiently robust. My own conclusion is that his concerns as to robustness relate largely to the stretching savings target which we have set ourselves for 25-26. Whilst these savings are substantial by any measure, they have been debated, scrutinised and examined heavily by budget holders, the transformation team and the corporate management team. There is a shared and common purpose amongst our officers to deliver this programme. In making these comments, may I make it absolutely clear that I fully acknowledge, understand and respect the observations made in the Section 25 report, as indeed do my Cabinet colleagues. We will always tell it how it is in a direct, open, transparent dialogue with our residents and will not shy away from difficult but necessary decisions. But, in summary, across the next 5 years, the measures taken within this MTFS will cause our reserves to more than double from £20.3 million to £43.7 million. Madam Mayor, the latest set of financial forecasts issued by the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee as recently as the 5th of February last make bleak reading with serious implications for us all. The National Gross Domestic Product projection indicates the economy teetering on the brink of recession. UK unemployment is forecast to increase, no doubt heavily influenced by the measures taken in the Chancellor's autumn budget statement, of which I will say more later, and the prevailing lack of economic confidence. We now see inflation surging upwards again from 2.5% to 3%, with the forecast of further increases to 3.7% by Q3 of this year, with no downward progress being achieved until 2027. This can be attributed to upward trends in food costs, water rates, and, in particular, the generous pay settlements negotiated by the government with a number of substantial groups of workers in the public sector. Madam Mayor, I was astonished to read Rachel Reeves' knee-jerk reaction to this news, which was that no one need worry about this because under her watch, wages had increased at the much higher rate of 5.9%. Madam Mayor, I can vividly remember when I was studying economics being set an essay to write entitled, "The wages that I pay are high because my prices are high, or is it that my prices are high because my wages are high? Discuss." Clearly, her economics education was fundamentally different to mine. Needless to say, Rachel from Accounts' comments were hastily withdrawn, but not before yet another massive insight into the lack of fiscal competence within this Labour government was put on show. In the period from December 2021 to August 2024, the Bank of England base interest rate has risen from its starting point of 0.1% to 5.25%, as the bank has sought to bring inflation under control. While subsequent reductions have seen the rate fall to 4.5%, the scope for further reductions is constrained, and the Monetary Policy Committee is not expecting a drop to even 4% before 2028. A very recent indication of the fiscal crisis facing the government was the reporting of borrowing by the Treasury, which, according to a forecast prepared by the Office for Budget Responsibility, should have stood at 105.4 billion, not billion, at the end of January 2025. The actual figure has been reported at 118.2 billion pounds. That is an excess of 12.8 billion pounds, or 12.1%. Madam Mayor, this is an alarming overshoot, so close to the finalisation of forecasts emerging from the autumn budget statement, and signals the extent of the problems which the Exchequer faces. It is clear that local government has been classified as an area of unprotected public spending, and hence we must approach the question of government support for the sector with great concern and pessimism. Analysis has demonstrated that in the period between 2010-11 to 2024-25, government department expenditure on local government has fallen by just short of 70% in real terms. In 2008-9, business rates represented 19% of local authority core funding. Today, it is less than 14%. Similarly, the revenue support grant represented 9% of core funding. Today, it is only 1%. This has been compensated as much as it can be by the growth in significance of council tax as a means of funding. In Hillingdon's case, council tax represents over 50% of recurring funding, notwithstanding the fact that Hillingdon has one of the very lowest rates of council tax in the Greater London area. Furthermore, whilst Hillingdon does have a successful and vibrant business community, we are only permitted to retain 18% of the business rates which we collect, as the remainder disappears to central government and the Greater London Authority. As a policy over the years, Hillingdon has always sought to minimise council tax increases. The inevitable consequence, therefore, is a low tax base, and as permitted changes in council tax are expressed in percentage terms, low-cost boroughs such as Hillingdon are unreasonably penalised. The government has already, in its short life, advised local authorities to maximise the potential council tax increases. It has been said that any failure to do so will adversely impair the ability of the council in question to receive its otherwise full entitlement to grants. Madam Mayor, in an environment where the statutory obligations of local authorities in areas such as social care, housing, education and waste disposal are ever increasing, income from central government is declining in real terms. It is clear that the funding model for local authorities is broken and dysfunctional. The Chancellor's autumn budget statement yielded many issues which we could usefully discuss, but in the interest of brevity, I will limit my comments to 3 topics. Before the issue of the autumn statement, the Prime Minister made a pledge that multi-year financial settlement would be received by councils in the interest of providing them with certainty and the ability to plan into the longer term. This has not been delivered. The statement proposed an increase to the rate of employers' national insurance and also, and this was something of a surprise, a reduction to the earnings threshold at which national insurance becomes payable. A promise was made that public sector bodies such as councils would not have to absorb this cost increase. In the final settlement, which was received 2 weeks ago, it became apparent that local authorities can only mitigate 80% of the increased payroll costs which they will incur. Furthermore, no relief is available to privately owned businesses who provide outsourcing services to public sector bodies. So we must expect that the contractors will be seeking to increase the rates which they charge. Like many councils, Hillingdon outsources a substantial number of services to privately owned contractors. The autumn statement did, however, announce a welcome 6% increase in real terms for the funding of children with special educational needs. However, this does not address and will not resolve the fundamental issue of the high needs block deficits in the dedicated schools grants of very many authorities, including Hillingdon. The National Audit Office has estimated that deficits on dedicated schools grants throughout the nation will amount to £4.6 billion by March 2026, at which time the statutory override, which currently operates to isolate DSG deficits from Council's general fund balances, is due to expire. No solution to the national problem of DSG deficits, nor to the future of the statutory override, has been provided. It has been widely reported that in putting together her autumn budget statement, the Chancellor had built in 9 billion of fiscal headroom into her calculations. However, it is clear that that has now disappeared due to slowing of economic growth, heavier inflation, and higher borrowing costs. Further promised defence spending, highly topical today of course, although partly covered by foreign aid cuts, will also add to this pressure. Many commentators believe that this will have the dual impact of compelling the Chancellor to institute spending cuts, as well as imposing even higher rates of taxation, such that the measures could come into play as soon as next month. So here we have it in summary as far as this new Labour government is concerned. Dancing to the tune of its paymasters, the trade unions, and hang the consequences. Fiscal incompetence, broken promises everywhere that you'd care to look. The party opposite appear to delight in witnessing our battle to maintain our pledge to residents. They have gleefully suggested that in the recent past we might need to hold our hands out to government for a financial bailout. Madam Mayor, given the woeful mismanagement of the national economy under Labour and its current state, it is unlikely that there could be a bailout. But in any event, we do not seek one. It is clear that Hillingdon must devise and deliver its own solutions, and that these are reflected within these proposals. We are confronted by an ever-growing demand for our services in key areas such as social care, asylum, housing, and waste disposal, where we sustain heavy statutory responsibilities and where we see relentless cost escalations driven by inflation and market forces. Therefore, delivery of our savings programme within this budget and the achievement of stringent adherence to budgeted cost levels are absolutely critical to our capacity to sustain that position. If this budget is not achieved in substance, it will be necessary for us to introduce radical and structural changes which go way beyond our present proposals in order to stabilise our financial position. Madam Mayor, we must recognise that Hillingdon is far from alone in confronting such financial pressures. A survey conducted of councils in England, Scotland and Wales showed that the current 24-25 budget year gaps totalled £3.5 billion. The largest individual council budget gap sits at 164 million, with the 20th largest at 37 million. By contrast, Hillingdon's budget gap for 24-25, while still being unacceptable, is a comparatively modest and commonplace £10 million. In Hillingdon's case, this gap can at least in part be attributed to a council which has the fastest population growth in London, is a borough which suffers extreme cost pressures due to the disproportionate and underfunded burden of being a major port of entry into the UK, and which has the second lowest council tax base in outer London. In 25-26, the national aggregate budget gap is projected to rise to £4.3 billion, with this rising to £8.5 billion by 26-27. Amongst the 33 London councils alone, the projected 25-26 funding gap is estimated to be £650 million. In 24-25, 19 councils in England were granted exceptional financial support packages by central government. And it has just been confirmed that a further 30 English councils have been granted similar support packages, the total amount of support agreed for this latest cohort being £1.3 billion. Additionally, a number of councils sought government permission to increase council tax at a rate greater than the specified 5% referendum limit for 25-26. It is notable that only 6 were granted permission for an increase by the Deputy Prime Minister, and that in several instances the requested level of increase was reduced, and that Labour-run authorities fared rather better than those in the hands of other political parties. We recognise the constraints in public sector finances and the need to introduce further changes to the way in which we deliver our services, while retaining their scope and integrity. This is fundamental to this administration's medium-term strategy, and hence will characterise not only this budget, but those which follow for future years. Social care consumes a huge proportion of every local authority's budgets. Indeed, it currently represents a considerable 65% of Hillingdon's total service expenditure. Central government funding for COVID-19 ceased in 2022, yet the legacy of COVID continues to this very day and is a material and continuing factor in terms of the escalating demand for social care services. Outsourced social care costs are particularly expected to be driven upwards by the Labour government's recent increases in employers' national insurance and the national minimum wage. In addition to these increases in the unit cost of care, demand for adult social care shows a relentless increase. Hillingdon now provides 3,709 adult social care packages. This has grown by 7% from the number in force in 23-24, and a similar level of growth is anticipated for 25-26. This forecast shows our health and social care costs escalating by £24 million, or 19%, across the next 5 years. Cost inflation is the single greatest pressure on our children, families and education budgets, and these alone will account for £9 million. A major factor within this are high-cost external placements, which can cost as much as £500,000 per child per annum. Unaccompanied asylum-seeking children continues to be a growing pressure, particularly because Hillingdon has Heathrow as a major port of entry within its boundaries. Whilst not all children arriving through Heathrow stay with us, there are always initial costs, and these must be borne by us without recompense. UASC is an area that has been perennially underfunded by successive governments. Political instability around the world also continues to increase asylum demand from families too. Indeed, Hillingdon has received 693 asylum applicants in the current financial year, and this represents an increase of 79% on the preceding year. The assimilation of asylum seekers, of course, imposes cost pressures on housing, education, health and social care, and again, is not adequately mitigated by grant funding. Homelessness suffers from inadequate grant funding, which fails to keep pace with our legal obligations. At the end of March 2024, Hillingdon had 801 households in temporary accommodation. By the end of the current financial year, this is expected to increase to 1,275, and that is an increase of 59%. And this has been driven by a shrinkage in the private rented sector, the continuing financial pressures on family budgets, and the growth in the demand from immigrants. At the same time, the net cost sustained by councils on nightly B&B accommodation has grown by 60% over the past year, and this is expected to continue to increase over next year. This has added a pressure of £8 million to our cost base over the next 5 years. These factors have conspired to maintain pressure on local authorities' finances, particularly and most significantly as central government grant funding has been and will continue to run flat while cost budgets escalate. Our 25-26 consultation budget indicated a budget gap of £6.4 million, which was to be set against reserves. We have succeeded in reducing this gap to £4.2 million. A full list of the changes can be found in Table 6 on page 33 of the Cabinet Budget Report. However, the final settlement gave us no greater clarity in terms of a number of key areas of funding for 26-27 and later years. We have preserved, supported and invested in our frontline services, and to the very best of our capacity and ability, we will continue to do so. We recognise the significance of these services and their importance to our residents. Hence, there have not been any cuts in key frontline services. Indeed, our philosophy is that we will strive to ensure that high-quality service is maintained, albeit that we will continue to seek delivery that is cost-effective and efficient. Our service expenditure forecast projections in the MTFS indicate an increase in annual budgeted costs from £285 million in the current financial year to £346 million by 2029-2030. This is a net increase of £61 million after we have realised the benefit of our £67 million savings programme. So to be absolutely clear about it, if we had not initiated the savings programmes, our costs over the next years would escalate by £128 billion. Inevitably, the largest single factor in this cost growth is inflation. This is projected to amount to £33 billion across the 5-year term, with £8 billion of increases falling within the first 2 years of the forecast period. The growing demand for council services is also a material factor, with this adding £28 million to our costs by 2029-30. Adult social care placements, support for looked after children, support for children with disabilities, and SEND transport collectively accounts for £19 million of this increase, while a further £3.6 million is derived from growth in demand for waste disposal, and a further £8 million, as I've already said, attributable to the increase in provision for the homeless. Within our corporate items budgets, the largest influence for change is in respect of debt service costs, which are projected to increase largely as a result of higher interest rates, but also to the changes in level of debt required to finance part of our capital programmes. This generates an increase in debt service costs of £13.5 million over the next 5 years. However, we are sheltered from the very worst impacts of interest rate rises by our long-term borrowing strategy, which I will comment on later on. Provisions against costs of meeting the new employer's national insurance burden and increased inflationary pressures, GLA charges for concessionary fares have also been established. Excuse me. Against this environment of escalating costs and limited growth in income, it is clear that we must maintain our policy of balancing budgets by the delivery of savings measures. An extensive programme comprising the zero-based budgeting and Star Chamber initiatives has identified a range of savings which are on a scale far greater than anything previously pursued. An important feature of this programme, which has not been present in earlier years, will entail the examination and determination of target operating models for frontline services. This will entail a fresh examination of the required deliverables from each service and the means by which management, delivery and performance assessment is achieved. It will maximise the utilisation of digital technology, including artificial intelligence, and will challenge the existing procurement strategies and structures, including insourcing or outsourcing options. The Target Operating Model initiative will deliver £25 million over the 5-year term out of a total programme of £66.6 million. This will reshape our council into a modern, forward-looking and fit-for-purpose provider of key services to residents. It should be noted that the budget and the savings programme have been examined with great care and in great detail by the corporate management team and the budget holders in order to ensure that actions and responsibilities are fully owned, understood and allocated. The project will be closely scrutinised and project managed at every stage along its process. Key features of the programme will comprise creating efficiencies in the way in which we deliver services while driving down internal bureaucracy and administrative costs, maximising and making the best use of grant funding, investing in developing modern digital technology and AI which will drive efficiency, be accessible to our residents and promote high quality business intelligence using enhanced data, optimising the use of our assets and ensuring that they deliver strong and positive returns wherever possible, commercialising our activities wherever possible. This 5-year forecast also includes invest to save capital spending amounting to £124 million within the general fund. Included within this are investments to expand residential care capacity, accommodation to mitigate homelessness, the creation of additional SEND units and digital technology, to name but a few. We will continue to invest in strong financial controls with the next phase of our new Oracle cloud system and the outputs from our financial improvement programme, and we will manage cash flows and borrowing levels. Whilst our costs will see a major increase across the next 5 years, it is clear that the only income source which we can count on to provide us with sustained growth is council tax. Madam Mayor, we understand the domestic cost of living pressures that our residents all face and have sought to minimise further cost burdens upon them. You will hear from me later about the excellent value which Hillingdon's council tax and fees and charges represent. But nevertheless, we must all face the reality that some cost escalation is unavoidable. Faced with the economic environment, it has been necessary to apply a 2.99% increase in core council tax, plus a 2% increase in the social care precept for 25-26. However, I must emphasise that this still leaves us with one of the very lowest rates of council tax in London. This level of increase will grow our council tax income, if sustained, by £42 million across the 5-year term, with a further £7 million being derived from expected growth in our population of taxpayers. Business rates will show a small increase in 25-26 of £3 million, but no further growth is anticipated over the following 4 years. As I've already said, I must emphasise that Hillingdon is only entitled to retain 18% of business rates earned within the borough, the balance being absorbed by central government and the Greater London Authority. As I've already mentioned, the trajectory for central government grant funding over the next 5 years is flat. In 25-26, Hillingdon's council tax on a Band D equivalent home will be £1,462, or an increase of £1.33 per week. I should add that the average increase across England has been calculated to be £2.04 per week. If we consider the current proposals after adding in the London mayoral precept, more of which later, the total 25-26 council tax bill for a resident in Hillingdon with a Band D property will be £1,952.38, whilst the equivalent cost with our neighbours are as follows: Barnet, £2,035.52, Ealing, £2,041.02, Hounslow, £2,085.82, Brent, £2,133.15, and Harrow, £2,395.86. Madam Mayor, Hillingdon charges the second lowest level of council tax in Outer London, with only Newham setting a lower charge. So to be clear, a Band D council taxpayer in Hillingdon will be £443.38 a year, or 22% better off than a neighbouring Harrow resident. And that is even before we consider the comparative impact of fees and charges. Consolidated within the annual council tax costs that I've referred to is the London mayoral precept, which is a levy on all London Borough residents. For 25-26, Mayor Khan's proposed precept will be £490.38, and hence represents 25% of a Hillingdon Band D resident's total bill. The London Mayor has increased the precept this year by 4%, which actually is quite modest when compared with the hikes he's imposed in earlier years. Could it be that it's coincidental, given the change in government? Or perhaps it's the case that Sadiq is making so much out of the Outer London ULEZ charge that he can afford to pay less attention to the precept. The 9 annual budgets which the Mayor of London has presided over have seen the precept increase by an extraordinary 77.7%. Clearly, this is driven by the futile attempt to feed the gaping financial black hole otherwise known as Transport for London, as well as wasting money on expensive media campaigns. The Mayor is clearly in step with his recently installed Westminster colleagues, spending profitlessly, victimisation of pensioners, gross financial mismanagement, and eye-watering tax increases. Over a period of 10 years, up to 2018-19, this Conservative administration operated a freeze in council tax rates, whilst at the same time preserving and in many instances enhancing frontline services. A conscious decision was made to provide excellent value to residents rather than to build up large reserves. Today, that council tax freeze is worth a saving of £6,375 to a resident and Band D council taxpayer who lives in Hillingdon throughout that 10-year period and continues to live here today. Over the period from April 28 until December 2024, the Consumer Price Index the generally accepted measure of inflation, has increased by 58%. Over the same period, the population of this borough has increased from 262,500 to 310,000, and that's an increase of 18%. By contrast, under Hillingdon Conservatives, council tax has increased by an overall 31% over this same period. Madam Mayor, here is the evidence of the great value that Hillingdon Conservatives are providing to residents. But let me remind you once again of the London Mayor's increase, 77.7% over the past 9 years. Furthermore, the introduction of the council tax older persons discount has yielded a saving for a Band D householder of £7,696 for any resident over the age of 65 who has participated in the scheme since its inception. If ever you were looking for the evidence of great support for our older residents, here it is. Madam Mayor, at this stage I must draw members' attention to recommendation 17, which has been included as a late addition to the order of business. This reflects a proposal to introduce a measure to add 100% council tax premium to second homes within the borough. This is reflected in the medium-term financial strategy taking effect from the 1st of April 2026 and is, of course, subject to resident consultation. As a borough, our fees and charges are amongst the very lowest per capita in London. Hillingdon sits in the bottom quartile of per capita charges for London. Our policy is that fees and charges should not be profit-making, but simply should cover the costs of service provision. We have once again seen historic higher levels of inflation hit our underlying costs, and therefore we have adjusted fees and charges by a minimum level of 5% to address the specific continuing loss-making areas and to address these historic inflationary pressures. It should be noted that the 25-26 budget anticipates a measure to introduce charging for the collection of green waste. This service has hitherto been provided to Hillingdon residents free of charge, but it is now necessary to bring in a modest charge in order to help balance the books. It should be noted that this will establish consistency with the vast majority of England councils who have charged for this service for many years. We're taking this proposal out to resident consultation, and a decision as to implementation will take account of the results of the consultation. During the last year, notwithstanding the difficult financial climate, Hillingdon has delivered many outstanding outcomes for its residents. These include, and I will go through them quickly, housing, the purchase of 194 new housing units, the continuing construction of 239 social housing units, resident safety, supported residents affected by flash flooding, secured closure orders to protect residents from antisocial behaviour, creating a greener future, major process with decarbonisation of council buildings using government grants, a £1 million programme of improvements at 5 parks in the borough, over 8,300 trees planted, 46 new electric chargers installed in our car parks, more than 7,000 households now signed up to our new food waste service, thriving and healthy households. Our adult social care service, outstanding service, has been rated the best in London and nationally. Provided help and support to older residents denied the winter fuel payment. Pioneered new technology to improve the patient hospital discharge process. Our outstanding rated children's service has opened several specialist SEND facilities, built 2 new residential children's homes, and developed a new payments and benefits package for our council foster carers. Investing in Hillingdon, working with businesses and partners to promote investment and prosperity in Hillingdon. Supporting residents to seek jobs through grant-funded programme. Creating a digitally enabled and well-run council. A £9 million programme to improve the way that residents can access services. Co-locating the new Uxbridge Library, Register Office and NHS offices within the Civic Centre. We've commissioned specialist operators to run services such as early years in the Beck Theatre. And particularly notable, continued success of our counter-fraud team, excellent team, which has prevented losses which otherwise would have amounted to £8.7 million. And actually this morning I received an update to say that in the year to date that is now standing at £10.1 million. These achievements and many more are of course derived from the excellent work of our officer teams. However, they could not have happened without the strategic direction, support and resource provided to them by this Conservative administration. Madam Mayor, we will hear shortly from a number of Cabinet member colleagues who will elaborate on our achievements and those planned initiatives for the future. Madam Mayor, the opposition take delight in trying to persuade anyone who will listen that Hillingdon is on the brink of bankruptcy. They tried to tell the electorate that it was about to happen during the 2022 election campaign, local election campaign, but it hasn't happened. And Madam Mayor, it will not happen under this Conservative administration. How could I be so confident of this assertion? Firstly, our levels of debt are low. Council General Fund debt levels across the UK, reported by the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government, reported that at the third quarter of 2024, there were 18 local authorities, each with borrowings in excess of £1 billion. Our immediate neighbours' borrowings were as follows. Labour-controlled Brent, £673 million. Labour-controlled Ealing, £750 million. Labour-controlled Barnet, £1.1 billion. Harrow, controlled by the Conservatives, £356 million. But by contrast, Hillingdon had £344 million in borrowings. Furthermore, Hillingdon sits very comfortably inside its borrowing limits and covenants, such that it does have the capacity to invest where appropriate. Madam Mayor, I'm reminded of a quote from Margaret Thatcher. To borrow and to borrow and to borrow isn't Macbeth with a cold, it's Labour Party policy. Yeah. Secondly, Hillingdon will not spend money that it does not have. We will continue to drive out costs through efficiency programmes such that we can deliver what our residents expect from us. Many councils aim to use reserves in order to absorb overspends rather than tackling the root cause of the overspend. Our strategy is not to do this, but to address the causation by eliminating overspends wherever possible and by delivering the adequate funding to cover our cost base. This administration believes that council tax received from our residents should be used for two purposes only. Firstly, to cover the necessary costs of providing and investing in excellent frontline services and infrastructure, and secondly, ensuring that the council has adequate but not excessive balances and reserves to meet any unforeseen costs and obligations which may arise from outside and uncontrollable factors. The strength of our balance sheet enables us to refresh, maintain and enhance our infrastructure, our leisure facilities, our schools, through investment from our General Fund capital programme. And we are committed to expenditure of £342 million over the next 5 years. Major features within this programme include the following: £13 million to complete the Useley and West Drayton Leisure Centre, £19 million on technology and digitisation, a further £10 million on carbon zero initiatives, £9 million to refurbish the Breaksbury Crematorium, £11 million on the continuation of the Civic Centre transformation, £24 million for the provision of adult residential care, £40 million for the accommodation to mitigate homelessness, £18 million on school buildings, including SEND, £51 million in terms of the borough's roads and pavements. This represents a firm commitment to enhancing and maintaining the environment in which Hillingdon residents enjoy, and can be achieved comfortably within our borrowing limits and is entirely affordable in terms of debt service obligations. Our overall effective interest rate on our borrowings currently stands at 4.03%. That is below the Bank of England base rate currently of 4.5%, and I must add that boroughs usually have to pay a premium above base rate. And this is a reflection of our careful, well-informed long-term planning, which has been achieved by locking in favourable long-term interest rates. Madam Mayor, I now turn to the Housing Revenue Account. The Housing Revenue Account is a ring-fenced fund that currently comprises an estate of 10,300 council houses with reserves of 15 million and an operating position which is on budget for the current financial year. The revenue budget for 25-26 will see rents increase by 2.7%, this being an increase of the CPI plus 1%, as required by law. This generates an increase to rental income for 25-26 of £4.2 million in monetary terms, and growth in other income of £300,000, while costs are forecast to increase by £4.6 million, the largest factor being payroll costs of £4.3 million, which have moved in line with prevailing inflation. The revenue account budget for 25-6 yields a balanced budget after contributions of £18.9 million towards our capital programme. Over the MTFS period, the 29th to 29-30, the Housing Revenue Account Capital Programme comprises a spend of £514 million. This programme will see the creation of 1,100 new homes and an investment of £193 million into the improvement of our existing housing stock. Over the 5-year term, Housing Revenue Account ring-fence borrowings to finance the programme will increase by only £90 million, with a peak level of £402 million being reached in 27-28. This stays within debt covenant levels and limits our debt service costs as these are comfortably assimilated. Madam Mayor, as I've already stated, this budget contains no service cuts. And notwithstanding the challenges which lie ahead, we are striving to maintain and modernise the delivery, comprehensiveness and quality of our frontline services. We will continue to monitor trends in economics and demographics closely, and we will be assisted in that process by our investment in digital technology. We will respond to the challenges that arise, and we will not shy away from difficult but necessary decisions. We recognise that the current cost of living pressures are challenging for everyone, but we are realists, and it is inevitable that we will all, as residents, have to share in an increased burden. However, it should be of comfort to us all here at Hillingdon that the cost of council tax and fees and charges are amongst the very lowest in outer London, and that this is a position that we will maintain. Madam Mayor, this is a strong and sound budget for this authority and for our residents. It is careful and prudent in its approach to the risks that it faces, but it is forward-looking and sensitive when making the right provisions for our residents. We will continue to invest in infrastructure and its frontline services, and we do so with confidence. In closing, Madam Mayor, I want to recognise that this budget has been a considerable collaborative effort by our excellent team of officers. I wish to thank our Chief Executive Officer, Tony Zayman, Chief Operating Officer, Matthew Warbridge, and all of the corporate management team for their engagement and support. This budget also draws heavily upon the expertise and substantial effort of the Finance Directorate. And I therefore wish to thank our Section 151 officer, Richard Ennis, and in particular, Andy Goodwin and Matt Davis and their teams, all of whom have worked long and hard to great effect on this endeavour. Madam Mayor, I therefore move recommendations 1 to 17 as set out in this evening's order of business. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Is there a seconder?
Madam Mayor, I second the motion and reserve my rights to speak at the end of the debate. Thank you.
Councillor Colleen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move this amendment to object to this budget on the grounds of the lack of robustness and the achievability of the savings within it. In particular, the saving of £2.5 million by charging for green waste collections. Not only is this the Conservative group sinking their own flagship policy of free weekly waste collections, but we believe that this is a figure plucked out of the air. It is based on an estimate of around 35,715 council taxpayers that will be willing to sign up for and pay £70 for their green waste to be collected. This comes after last year's decision to move to fortnightly collections of green waste for a quarter of the year. What we are seeing, Madam Mayor, is the thin end of the wedge. The Conservative Cabinet gradually eating away at their own manifesto promises, selling off the family silver in the form of council-owned assets, and all this after raiding the reserves to try and hide their abysmally poor financial management. It was only in July 2023 that this chamber debated a Labour motion on maintaining free weekly waste collections. And Douglas Mills accused the Labour group of wanting to introduce a charge for garden waste, as they do in Camden. Well, Madam Mayor, no wonder the Conservatives voted against a cross-party pledge not to charge for green waste collections here in Hillingdon. Madam Mayor, the success rate of the Cabinet's management of the budget and its ability to achieve the savings they have previously recommended has been dismal, to say the least. Over the last few years, the Labour group have highlighted the direction of travel and the very real risk of bankruptcy in a form of a Section 114 notice. But the Conservatives have continued to raid the reserves and propose unachievable savings just to balance their budgets. Although the Section 151 officer has assured us that the depleted reserves are adequate, they are far from ample, and we are reliant on the proposed savings in this budget to be achieved in order to avoid that Section 114 notice. Madam Mayor, the proposed charge for garden waste is an ill thought out proposal which we believe will prove to be yet another unachievable saving. However, this time, with the financial stability of the authority on a knife edge, it could be the straw that breaks the camel's back. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Is there a seconder?
Madam Mayor, I second and reserve my right to speak at the end. Just for the sake of clarity for members and members of the public watching, we are now debating the proposed objection to the budget, which is set out in italics at the bottom of page 5, top of page 6 on the order of business.
Any other speakers? Councillor Bathurst? Oh.
Madam Mayor, I too object. I object to the failure of successive governments to properly fund local authorities. I object to the increasing amount of Hillingdon's business rates that are taken by government and the Mayor of London. I object to having to meet the service demands arising from having Heathrow Airport in our borough but not being fully funded. And I object to the fact that it is the residents that consume least of our council expenditures that are expected by government to pay even more for what little they do use. But to object without making any suggestion of what to do differently has very little effect. Labour's motion of objection shows they are bereft of ideas or bereft of the leadership and unity necessary to implement their ideas. Had we followed Labour's advice in budget setting since the last election, we would be in a far worse position. Reserves would be £6.8 million lower, and we would not be in a position to set a legal budget tonight. The Labour group have opposed our measures to reduce cost, including the movement of Uxbridge Library to the Civic Centre, stopping our early years service even though the market does it more efficiently, the ending of the ongoing subsidy to the Beck Theatre, the sale of assets no longer needed. Following Labour's ideas would have bankrupted this council. In the absence of suggestions from our opposition colleagues, let's see what's in the Labour playbook to find out what they would likely do. The obvious one is to seek permission to raise council tax above the referendum threshold, as 4 Labour councils have done and 2 Liberal councils. They would blame it on Hillingdon Conservatives, saying we have kept council tax too low for too long for the council to be sustainable. Our budget shows differently. They might join the 30 councils that have been given exceptional financial support this year. Yes, we too considered that, as it does buy time, but it doesn't solve the problem, and it cedes control of council expenditure to bean counters, who will certainly not be putting residents first in their decision making. This is too high a price to pay when we can control our own destiny. Instead of our proposal to charge for green waste collections, we could have raised fees and charges, charging more for older cars and diesels. Labour policy, not achievable, not realistic. We could have gone to fortnightly or even 3 weekly rubbish collections. But even dismissing the capital costs of bringing that in, we don't do it because the residents have told us no thank you, and we believe in putting them first. Or we couldn't stop investing in our public realm in the way that Labour authorities have closed libraries, cut back on their road maintenance or the improvement of the management of their neighbourhoods and open spaces. Our budget shows that we do not need to do this. This is a lawful budget, Madam Mayor, and I am confident that Council will support it. Therefore, it's no surprise we would be opposing this objection.
Are there any other speakers? Councillor Mathers.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I seconded this amendment, but before I do so, I wish to take this opportunity to thank all of the council officers for their comprehensive work and assistance in our budget preparations this year. Madam Mayor, members in this chamber tonight are being asked to consider a proposed budget from the Cabinet that is lawful but not significantly robust. And this surely is a shock to us. How did the Cabinet get its position so wrong in December? So wrong that they are rushing through a £2.5 million saving charging for bin collections without public consultation. We in the Labour Group have warned them about their financial modelling for years. The reserves are too low, they can't estimate their spending or bank their savings. And it is for this reason the Labour Group is not submitting a traditional itemised amendment. Itemised amendments require to have sufficiently robust estimates. They also need those with full access to the accounts, which we don't have, to be able to go and rethink and change the modelling that is taking us on such a knife edge. It is clear that our amendment, let's be clear, our amendment in the form of an objection has not been taken lightly. After months of work with the finance team and considerable deliberation, we have taken the tough decisions to ask Cabinet to go back and try again. Madam Mayor, I equally want to appeal to every single member here tonight who does not want to vote to get rid of free weekly bin collections to vote for this amendment. So we may be dismayed at the Conservatives' £10 million overspend. There's nearly £70 million DSG deficit. Their huge target of £34 million savings next year. But we are definitely concerned by their proven track record of only achieving an average of £13 million a year savings since 2016. This Cabinet has written off millions of pounds of unachieved savings, and we need cash in the bank. We do not need theoretical savings. None of us in this chamber want to see this council subject to bankruptcy, and yet now we're on a knife edge, and Section 114 will take the control from us and put it in the hands of commissioners. When I read this paperwork for this budget for tonight's meeting, I felt sick in my stomach. How can the council have managed to get us this close to ruin? What have they been doing, and why are they willing to risk it all for our local services? Over 20 years of Conservative control administration, and this is what we're left with. It's not sufficiently transparent, it's not sufficiently robust, and the Cabinet must do better.
Councillor Goddard.
Councillor Goddard has moved the original motion. You have a right to reply to the amendment before Councillor Curling.
Madam Mayor, I don't wish to speak. Thank you.
Okay, finally, Councillor Curling.
Councillor Colleen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, the Conservative group may well try to blame the Labour government, or anybody else for that matter, but they can't get away from the fact that Hillingdon has some unique issues due to the way that they have managed the budget. For many years, the budget was set by what other councils were doing. Anyone who remembers budget speeches in the past will recall that there was far more content on what Harrow, Ealing and Hounslow were doing, rather than the needs of Hillingdon's budget. The previous politically driven policy of setting charges at 10% lower than neighbouring boroughs and other politically motivated decisions have caused structural damage to the budget that have compounded over time to generate significant black holes. Quite frankly, Madam Mayor, the can has been kicked down the road for so long, now it's payback time. So how are the Conservatives proposing to pay back the black hole that they have created? Well, Madam Mayor, the answer is to get residents to pay more to get less, and to propose unachievable savings to balance the books. As a result of this budget, a Band D council taxpayer will now pay £1,952 in council tax. However, if they live in a house with a garden and have a car in a parking management scheme, their total bill will be £2,106. All of a sudden, it doesn't feel like they're paying a low council tax anymore. So that's another Conservative flagship sunk. Madam Mayor, we believe that this budget is so dire that a conventional amendment cannot address the fundamental issues that this council now faces. We are not convinced that the Cabinet savings proposals are robust enough or achievable to fend off a potential 114 notice in the near future. And whilst things are okay now, it's clear that they are just okay and that this is a pivotal moment. Madam Mayor, I would urge members opposite to join with us in objecting to this budget and sending it back to Cabinet to reconsider.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We now move to the vote. If I might remind members that in accordance with the Local Authorities Standing Orders 2014, recorded votes are required on all votes to do with the budget. So I will ask members in alphabetical order if you are in voting for the proposed objection as set out at the bottom of page 5, top of page 6, moved by Councillor Colleen, seconded by Councillor Mathers, against it or abstaining. Councillor Abbey.
For.
Councillor Ahmad Walana. Councillor Banerjee. Councillor Bassett. Councillor Bennett. Councillor Batt. Councillor Bianco. Councillor Bridges. Councillor Burles. Councillor Burrows. Councillor Tubadar. Councillor Curling. Councillor Davies. Councillor Dennis. Councillor Dott. Councillor Edwards. Councillor Farley. Councillor Gaelic. Councillor Garg. Councillor Gill. Councillor Goddard. Councillor Gohill. Councillor Higgins. Councillor Islam. Councillor Judge. Councillor Kaur. Councillor Lavery. Councillor Lewis. Councillor Makwana. Councillor Mand. Councillor Martin. Councillor Mathers. Councillor Douglas Mills. Councillor Richard Mills. Councillor Nelson. Councillor Nelson West. Councillor O'Brien. Councillor Palmer. Councillor Punja. Councillor Riley. Councillor Sansapuri. Councillor Singh. Councillor Smallwood. Councillor Sweeting. Councillor Tuckwell. Mr Deputy Mayor. Madam Mayor.
Against.
Madam Mayor, that proposed objection has been lost 27 votes to 20. So, for members' clarification, we return now to the debate on the main budget proposals, 1 to 17, as set out in the order paper.
Councillor Tuckwell.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Hillingdon, under this Conservative administration, has a long period itself on delivering excellent public services whilst maintaining the second lowest council tax in Outer London. This is not by accident, but by prudent financial management and a relentless focus on efficiency. However, the financial pressures we face are unprecedented, and are a direct result of the reckless economic decisions of this disastrous Labour government. As Councillor Goddard has outlined, the rise in employer national insurance and the resulting inflation increases have added millions to Hillingdon's financial pressures. They promised full payment to local authorities for their unnecessary manifesto-breaking national insurance, but surprise, surprise, broke that promise at the first opportunity. Local government funding is simply not enough, forcing councils like ours to absorb the impact whilst protecting vital local services. In Hillingdon, we have made responsible choices to avoid excessive council tax hikes or unsustainable borrowing. Instead, we have found efficiencies, reformed our operating model and safeguarded frontline services. But make no mistake, this is becoming increasingly difficult in the face of Labour's neglect. Rising demand for adult and children's social care, worsening homelessness crisis and soaring energy costs have all made it worse by Labour's failure to step up and provide proper support. The Labour government's so-called economic stewardship have left councils on the brink. Madam Mayor, despite this adversity, this Conservative administration will continue to stand firm in our commitments to our residents. Here in Hillingdon, under the Conservative administration, we will continue to see record investment in our highways infrastructure, housing stock improvements, and not to mention a new state-of-the-art leisure centre in West Drayton. We are not alone in this struggle. Many councils are facing the same pressures. The difference is that we are taking decisive action where Labour has failed. Their reckless policies have left local authorities to fend for themselves, and residents are paying the price. Hillingdon's Conservatives will not allow Labour's economic failures to dictate our future. We will continue to fight for fair funding, hold this government to account, and ensure that our residents receive quality services they deserve. Madam Mayor, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts this evening, and I ask through you to the Leader of the Opposition, as you have presented no alternative this evening, what would you do? Thank you.
Councillor Punja.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, this year's Section 25 is a chilling read and explains quite explicitly how the financial operating model that Hillingdon Conservatives have so often boasted about in this very chamber is not sustainable, not fit for purpose, and not value for money for our residents of Hillingdon. Madam Mayor, I reference some concerning statements from the Section 25 report. This council does not have proper arrangements in place to identify and manage risks to its financial resilience. This council has inadequately implemented an under-resourced Oracle, so financial monitoring has proven difficult, oversight poor and siloed. This council needs a transparent and open approach to reserve movements. Netting budgets off and amalgamations need to stop as a practice. This council's accounts of 22-23 were disclaimed by the external auditor. They are not fully assured nor qualified. This council did not fully understand or mitigate the scale of demand and inflationary pressures it faced when setting its medium-term financial forecast from 2024 onwards. This council did not facilitate decision-making with high-quality information. This has impacted our financial position. This council needs to improve governance across the council. Too many nil and limited assurance reports. These are red flags that are cultural ownership issues of good governance. This council has finally realised that it can no longer continue to draw on reserves every year. This council needs to have a culture where overspending is unacceptable. And remember, they have an accountant as a cabinet member for finance. You couldn't make it up. Don't put that on your CV. So, Madam Mayor, my take from this proposed budget is don't touch it with a barge pole. It's based on assumptions which are not supported by high quality information, pumped with savings that this cabinet has failed to achieve every year. And what we don't know is when CIPFA conduct its review, whether further black holes in the untransparent movement of money will be found. Alarmingly for our residents, by the time this Conservative cabinet woke up this year, according to the report, it's been left too late. The report now asks for a significant step change away from low-charging environment. That means maximum increases on taxes, fees and charges to our residents. This so-called billion-pound business is a billion-pound catastrophe that needs a cultural change from the top. And sadly for Hillingdon, whilst other councils are currently investing into their communities because they've built their reserves through Conservative government's austerity measures, Conservative cabinets ran Hillingdon into the ground, depleting reserves year on year with poor financial oversight, poor decision-making and poor governance, so says the report. Madam Mayor, we cannot support this budget.
Councillor Sweeting.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As the Cabinet report of the 20th of February states, to deliver this budget and manage its risks will require a step change within the whole Council. Its culture, capability, capacity and focus. Moreover, this administration is having to call in the independent Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountability to try to ensure the books stay balanced and address the looming £38 million black hole, reduced by £4 million using yet again our ever-dwindling reserves. The proposed cuts of 34 million are the largest yet, amounting to crime, more than double than in previous years. But even then, we failed to actually make the proposed savings 5 years out of 5, leaving the current tsunami of debt. The administration is hoping that the financial cavalry will avert the crisis, which, be it very clear, is of this administration's own making, as the seeds of this financial debacle go back a long way to some unsafe decisions made, and which are well described by the independent auditors. The one comfort this administration continually uses is, look at us, we're doing absolutely great, as we have a lower council tax than our neighbours. Yes, it's lower than Ealing by just £1.70 a week. What? But that's only just enough to buy 3 mini Mars bars or a third of a cup of coffee. But wait, has Ealing got a budget shortfall of 34 million? No.
No.
Has Ealing got a high needs deficit of 68 million? No. Did Ealing demand its schools release 7 million of its budgets to prop up its high needs deficit? No. Is Ealing using the services of the financial cavalry to change its culture, capability, capacity and focus? No. So Hillingdon residents have that extra £1.70 a week, but are faced with swinging cuts. It's a catastrophic, only just balanced and lawful budget from this administration, which has not even been aware of the true state of its finances. It's a fingers crossed, please let it go away, not fit for purpose budget. And the sheer financial incompetence buck has finally stopped where it needs to stop, at this Conservative administration, with its now fully audited financial failures. Kick it back to Cabinet, Madam Mayor, as it's based on quicksand. Thank you.
Councillor Mand.
Madam Mayor, it is not only the Council's proposed budget which is under extreme pressure next year, but so is the designated school grant, which is predicted to stand at £68 million in deficit at the end of next month. This deficit is currently ring-fenced by central government until March 2026, and Hillingdon Council waits with bated breath to see whether this ring-fencing will be extended. If not, Hillingdon Council's hopeful reserves of some £20 million will be completely swept away, with the optimistic accumulative deficit of £50 million still owing. We will be, in effect, bankrupt. So where do the seeds of this mounting deficit come from? Well, Madam Mayor, it's a similar picture to the general budget failures. When the 2014 Children and Families Act extended the Council's role to include children and young people from 0 to 25 in its services, it came with no additional funds from the then Conservative government. So, Hillingdon's Cabinet, despite continuous warnings from Hillingdon Labour, put head in sand and said, not our problem to fund. So, the deficit rose and rose until the Council had to address the problem. But by that time, the deficit had reached the peak levels it is today. Madam Mayor, this Cabinet will contend that this is a nationwide problem. They claim that all councils are in the same boat due to the surging costs of high needs. However, all councils are not in the same financial predicament, no matter how many times Councillor O'Brien tries to convince us otherwise. Hillingdon is in a special club of 38 local authorities who required government to bail them out with a safety valve agreement to the tune of 25 million. This agreement was suspended due to a failure of delivery. Hillingdon Council now has the highest DSG deficit of any of the 32 London boroughs, higher than all of its outer boroughs as well as the inner ones. Through complete political incompetence, Hillingdon Council has been left in a position where the Cabinet are asking us to vote for their proposed budget with 2 devastating avalanches of financial failures about to strike. No thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Sansbury.
Madam Mayor, the budget present here tonight leaves no question as to where the blame lies for this tragic financial mess that Hillingdon Council finds itself in. And the blame does not lie with the new Labour government, which has provided approximately £38 million more in the funds to Hillingdon Council, including a higher local government settlement and £1 million for potholes. This council must applaud our new Labour MP, Danny Beals, for delivering more to this council in a 6 months than the previous MP did in a year. It does not lie with the Chancellor budget. The Treasury has ensured that 80% of the national insurance employer contribution will be reimbursed by the state. Inflationary pressure are much lower than the 11% following the disastrous mini-budget from then Conservative Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng. It does not lie with the Mayor of London, who continues to invest into Hillingdon, including funding for our police and fire service, as well as 1.9 million alone for Councillor Bianco cycleway plans. So where does the blame lies with? Madam Mayor, it could be Conservative cabinet which have been in power for 27 long years. The same ones that spent on far too many vanity projects, provided primary school places costing millions that were not needed, carried out poorly thought, thorough policy and much more. The result is here in the auditor's report for everyone to see in plain black and white. Let me quote: there is significant weaknesses in the council financial sustainability, weakness in data, lack of robustness, poor arrangement in respect of risk. Madam Mayor, this council under this cabinet has been sleepwalking into this financially dangerous state. So don't blame others when the buck must stop with you. Don't blame the new Labour government for your failing. Don't blame the Labour opposition as we are not in power. Be brave. Accept your blunders. Admit your blame and do better. As residents of Hillingdon are being failed by your failure. Madam Mayor, I cannot support this budget. Thank you.
Councillor Islam.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm speaking against this budget because it does nothing to support our residents who are privately renting. It does not address the clear nuisance that some HMOs and other private sector rented houses bring to a community: the noise, the litter, and security. It does not adequately resource the private sector housing or give them the enforcement power they need. Yet again, the Conservative administration has failed to get a grip on tackling these recurrent issues in many parts of this borough, and as such, I simply cannot support this budget. We, as a councillor, get complaints week after week, month after month, year after year. Constant complaint from our residents in our ward about the impact of HMOs and other bad rental. We are not talking about number here. This is about families, people who need our help, who are distressed, to which this budget completely disregards. Madam Mayor, at a resident meeting on the 3rd runway, the leader of the council heard about the blight, inactivity, lack of care by his and previous administration had caused communities ripped apart by failure to license a data awful landlord. Has there been any enforced plan to tackle this issue since? None. We have seen a steady increase in HMO in all wards, with more safety fire incidents increasing yearly. Estimated figures suggested there are approximately 2,500 HMOs in our borough, both licensed and unlicensed. Madam Mayor, what is this administration waiting for? Proper licensing field could provide much needed fund for enforcement, and improvement of our housing standard. Why is it not in the budget? Does the council not care about the safety of its residents? This current failure, why so many of our residents are fed up with this administration, lack of action as the damage to community continue and the loss of pride in our street. I cannot vote for the budget that continue not deliver for residents. Thank you.
Councillor Gill.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's clear why there was such a delay in publishing this proposed budget. I can only imagine the arguments within the Conservative group as they were forced to abandon the flagship policies just to balance the books. No wonder Hillingdon is no longer a happy place to live. According to Rightmove's September 2024 rankings, Hillingdon was rated the saddest place to live, ranking 213th in the country. Residents cite a lack of green spaces and a loss of local pride. So let's talk about why. The council pays £40,000 a year to showcase how green it is. But is it really? The Green Flag scheme was meant to recognise and reward well-managed parks and green spaces, setting national benchmarks. Yet this Conservative administration has been more focused on collecting green flags than actually maintaining green spaces. With relentless service cuts, they have completely abandoned the 27 commitments under the Green Flag scheme. Madam Mayor, what happened to the commitment that the Hillingdon Conservatives were once so proud of? Why are so many of our parks now left to volunteers to maintain, just like Ruislip Woods? I can almost picture Councillor Gohill lowering the green flags she speaks so fondly of, her head in disbelief, stunned by the epic failure of her own administration. And what about Councillor Bianco? What will he be holding up when there's no green flags left to boast about? Perhaps he'll be waving a big red flag, because that's exactly what this budget is full of. Red flags everywhere, but not a green flag in sight. And one of the biggest red flags, this administration is now consulting on charging residents for green waste collections, desperately trying to claw back £2.4 million to balance their failing budget. But what happens if residents reject this budget? Will the administration listen, or will they just force them through anyway? Let's ask Councillor Douglas Mills, who never stops boasting about the Conservatives' commitment to free waste collection. Will he support a budget that raises council tax to its maximum and charges residents for waste collection for the first time ever? Madam Mayor, will Councillor Mills lead a rebellion against this betrayal, or will he simply fade into the background, abandoning the promises he has made time and time again in this chamber and to the people of this borough? With green flags disappearing, red flags piling up, and green waste charges looming, this budget is built on guesswork and shaky numbers, desperately trying to build the books. Madam Mayor, cannot force for this failing budget. Thank you.
Councillor Gaelic.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Tonight, as we set our budget for the coming year, we have a duty to ensure that our priorities reflect the needs of our residents. One of the most fundamental expectations from our constituents is that they live in clean, safe and well-maintained communities. Yet time and time again, we hear their concerns about litter, fly tipping and a lack of enforcement against those who show disregard for our shared spaces. A clean borough is not just about aesthetics. It's about public health, safety and community pride. When our streets are covered in litter and waste, when fly tipping becomes the norm rather than exception, we send a message that we do not care enough to act. Madam Mayor, despite the hard work of our waste and enforcement teams, they remain underfunded. Many fly tipping hotspots lack CCTV coverage. Please be aware that we only have 47 mobile cameras to cover around 44 square miles, so demand is high. The environmental enforcement team will issue on average between 2 and 3 £1,000 worth of fixed penalties each month for fly tipping. by littering and fly tipping happens every day. Fly tipping fines have been doubled recently in 2024. The increase for fly tipping was 150%, littering 300%, and graffiti 500%. And despite these increases, enforcement is falling short due to the lack of coordination and weak follow-through on commitments already made by this Council. Issues like fly tipping and inadequate HMO licensing enforcement persist, not because of a lack of policy, but due to poor monitoring and evaluation. If we are serious about making our borough a better place to live, work and visit, then we must make sure that enough resources are allocated to surveillance, enforcement officers, public awareness campaigns and efficient waste disposal services. Madam Mayor, we now expect our Conservative administration to reinvest this revenue into stronger enforcement and cleaning up our streets. Our residents deserve better, and our budget should reflect that. Thank you.
Councillor Mathers.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This budget proposal is catastrophically short-sighted, especially in terms of the housing revenue account, and all councillors should vote against it. It seems there is no spared area in which this Conservative Cabinet fails to deliver to its residents. The key one being discussed here is the state of our HRA, the very account that enables the Council to build and maintain much-needed council housing. As a refresher, the December 2024 budget proposals by the Cabinet had the building of an additional 600 council homes over the 5 years compared to the version we have before us. Now, before they come up with any excuses, may I remind the Cabinet that they could apply for funding, government, mayoral, to begin another regeneration project in the next 5 years, potentially even one in my ward along the Uxbridge Road. Madam Mayor, the Conservatives have a poor record for bidding for grants. Surely they have the expertise and experience now of regeneration with Avondale and Austin Road developments, so why are they not grasping these opportunities? Simply put, this Conservative Cabinet is making an active decision not to build what is needed, clearly showing a lack of willpower to tackle a very pressing issue. We heard from Councillor Goddard the rising cost of temporary accommodation, and they are having to spend a further £40 million on it. We were working with the finance team in preparation for the budget, as you'd expect, and found that we could have afforded, even with these new proposals, an additional 200 council homes built by 2029, the starting of a higher amount of council housing that would make the HRA plans more robust. Madam Mayor, I ask, what is preventing them from prioritising housing in this desperately needed time? What is the excuses? Who are they going to blame? There is financial ability to do it, but it's their track record of delayed building, for example with special needs places leading to not being able to meet the safety valve agreement and other contractual problems, that is causing problems. I understand they're going to be concerned. The decency rating of the housing stock was a worry. Is there something lurking in the HRA we don't know about? We simply don't know. There is not sufficient robustness in the estimates. House and rent prices in this area are unaffordable, and council housing is part of the solution. Madam Mayor, the Labour government is working with ambition to build housing, but this Conservative Cabinet do not want to deliver with them to provide what residents need. The residents are the ones paying the consequences for a lack of prioritisation on housing of this Conservative administration. Successive Conservative cabinets have not invested in increasing sufficient numbers of council homes in this borough, and it has been left too late to have the impact right now when we vitally need it. Thank you.
Councillor Cole.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This budget happens to remind me of someone I met going on and on about his car, not because it was slick or fast or had a fascinating color, but simply because it had 4 wheels. In fact, when I caught a glimpse of it, the whole thing was held together with a duct tape. Exactly like this administration's sad and sorry budget, ifs and buts budget, as they try to cover years of financial mismanagement with a digital veneer on a system that is officially outdated and no longer fit for purpose. Ironically, even the Oracle is refusing to rescue them without proper investment. And their target operating model, promising 15 million in savings by 26-27, is nothing but a last-minute scramble to patch up legacy issues of their own making. They're rapidly moving towards digitization and AI without testing, without safeguards, and without considering the people who will be left behind. And we are already witnessing the cracks forming. An elderly woman in Hayes struggling to report repairs and living in constant stress. A young man who can't log into his council tax account because the system keeps saying he's not authorized. A community award winner left frustrated and angry after having to go around in circles with automated systems as she tries to help vulnerable people navigate council services. These aren't just glitches. They're real people, real life, and real consequences of system that is clearly failing our residents. The Crown Commercial Service Guidelines say councils must put interests of their citizens first and ensure smooth transitions. LDA says digital change must not lead to exclusion. Hillingdon is failing on all these counts and more. From the said president and from our tech experience as councillors, we can safely say there's no guarantee that residents won't suffer in the process. This is more than a budget problem, Madam Mayor. It's a leadership problem. Instead of learning from past mistakes, this administration is making new ones at double speed. We are not against digital transformation. We support modernization, but it must be tested, inclusive, and resident-focused. Measure of its success must be resident experience and not just cost-cutting. Madam Mayor, the Tory administration is doing its bare statutory minimum to stay lawful. The financial prudence mask has come undone. It's a dire budget which relies on incomplete, high-risk financial initiatives that affect the residents' ability to access essential services. We cannot support, as our residents deserve better than this, much better. Thank you.
Councillor Nelson.
Madam Mayor, as you will be aware, the consultation on this proposed budget took place over the busy Christmas and New Year period, advertised on Hillingdon Council's website and social media. The consultation was there to receive advice from our residents and businesses, hear what was going well and not well. Madam Mayor, Appendix F of the Cabinet report spell it out. 52% of respondents are dissatisfied with the budget. This figure was completely omitted in the Cabinet report, which gave it a completely different spin, and I quote, 38% of respondents were satisfied with the budget, end quote. So nothing about the dissatisfied 52, which is absolutely typical of this administration. Always screwed and consultant to indicate that the shop window is perfect and all is well when it's not. So what did our residents actually say about the way Hillingdon Council works? Yes, to the weekly waste collection. But wait, there is now a concealed sword over whether green waste collection will require Hillingdon residents to take off their garden gloves and reach for their purses and wallet to pay again for the service which is currently included in the council tax. Now for the negative, and there are quite a few. Concerns on waste management and street cleaning, highlighting torn bags and residents rather than the council doing the cleaning up. Parking charge, once free and now a tax burden on many families. Potholes on roads and trip hazards on pavements. The council priorities being all wrong. These concerns are indeed the concerns of our residents, and the budget before us this evening, with its punishing cuts, are likely to see a deterioration of outcomes. Yes, the hard work of Hillingdon Little Pickers is to be applauded, but let it be clear, they are doing the work which the council should be delivering because the council are not. Ditto local councillors who have taken on the added role of reporting fly tipping, rubbish, discarding dog litters, discarded everything. So the budget before us this evening has been given a thumbs down by those who responded. It goes without saying that plugging the 34 million black hole in the council's finance is not, and I repeat, not going to make the 52% dissatisfied satisfied in the next financial year. I cannot support this budget.
Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As Cabinet Member for Adult Social Care and Health, I'm pleased to speak in support of this budget with pride, passion and not a mini Mars bar in sight. We all know that health and social care faces significant challenges, whether that be the increasing demand on services, the financial pressures we navigate, national insurance increase, COVID impact, or the ongoing need to recruit and retain professionals. However, despite these challenges and pressures, this council's social care service has been inspected and rated good by CQC, something we should be very proud of. Our hospital discharge and reablement team performs to a high standard, enabling timely discharge and transfer for our residents to regain their independence and confidence after illness and injury. This is well respected by my 7 North West London Borough colleagues, where I represent Hillingdon on the Integrated Care Board. Developing and improving our service delivery is an essential focus of this council. By the introduction in my service of digital technology, tried and tested, despite what has been said from the other side, we have made significant savings and improved quality of service. This budget reflects our commitment to protecting and enhancing these essential services. It supports community initiatives that help people live well at home for longer. We are strengthening our partnerships with the NHS, voluntary sector and care providers to ensure a joined-up approach, putting residents first. I support this budget. I thank my colleague Councillor Goddard for his dedication to ensuring that we keep within our statutory guidelines in social care. Not just as a financial plan, this budget, but as a statement of our values and priorities. Thank you.
Councillor O'Brien.
And we'll just get some facts in as well now. So in January this year, we announced that the London Early Years Foundation will take over the running of our 3 early years nurseries. This arrangement, once bedded in, will provide a regular income for the council as we release 3 buildings on a long-term lease. Hillingdon continues to move forwards with the family hubs and children's centres. This service provides families with access to a range of early learning and development services. South Ruislip, the most recent to come on board in January this year, adds to Hayes and Uxbridge family hubs. All 3 spaces have been relocated and redeveloped and based in the centre, north and south of the borough. The new spaces have created closer and renewed collaborations with our partnerships and the families that use them. We have launched the Next Gen Youth Offer for children aged 8 to 19, ensuring young people can get support and that wider early help and prevention services if they need it, by using our family hubs at the right time of day, offering online sessions, having more street-based and outreach work to support young people, taking the services to them with a second bus on order. Children's social care has long since been one of the largest spends for most councils across the country, and under quite difficult circumstances, councils are now expected to pay unprecedented and exorbitant sums for placements. Hillingdon has therefore made cost-effective decisions, and in the budget under capital investment and linked to the savings programme, we are countering this by repurposing existing assets or rebuilding new ones, like the 2 homes at the Willows and the 6 new children's homes at Charville Lane, on the Charville Lane site. In addition, with the launch of our new foster care package, we are now starting to see the benefits with new foster carers coming through, more benefits. Education in Hillingdon continues to provide children with a high quality learning environment for the best start in life. Next year we've budgeted £22.4 million for schools condition works to maintain and upkeep our Hillingdon schools. We continue to look at school sufficiency by supporting our residents with providing school places for all Hillingdon children. We have 71,000 children under the age of 18 years of age. Our watch on SEND sufficiency remains high, and we continue to invest in special educational needs from early years to adulthood. For example, Meadow, the site at Harefield, Eden Academy and HRUC, all creating new places with staggered onboarding in 25, 26 and 27. And we continue to move forward with the new collaboration and SEND banding structure. Although the current education and high needs block budget is not of our choosing, I refer Council to the realities that Councillor Goddard outlined, Madam Mayor, and not what the Labour Group have just said. We will continue to endeavour.
Councillor
I support
O'Brien, your
this
time.
budget. Thank you very much.
Councillor Gohill.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I wasn't expecting to speak tonight, but I think there's just been too much said that I need to address. Firstly, Councillor Mand, I hope you've not done this intentionally, but I believe he's misled the residents listening to this message and the Chamber. Hillingdon does not have the largest deficit in London. It does not. Merton does, and Merton has a deficit nearly double the size of Hillingdon. Labour-led Merton, might I add. Madam Mayor, if you allow me, if I could just clear a few things up. First of all, when we're talking about the budget here, we're not talking about our money, it's residents' money, it's taxpayer money. And we as Conservatives, we on this side of this chamber, in this administration, will keep as much of that in their pockets as possible. Now, we have heard clearly from the other side, Madam Mayor, through Councillor Curlin, if Labour are in charge, we would have Councillor Curlin's cash grabs. The Labour would hoard residents' money and continue to tax them higher and higher year on year. Now, as Councillor Goddard said, we've been told to up our reserves, and we will do that. Our 5-year plan shows that, doubling reserves over that 5-year period in the MTFS, as he mentioned. But what we have given here is a balanced budget, a balanced legal budget. Something else they have also said is unlawful. They said it's unlegal, which also is not true. It is, and you'll see it in the minutes. Sorry, Madam Mayor, am I able to speak without being disturbed by councillors on the other side? Yep. Okay. Thank you. If I may continue with silence, Councillor Plunger. But we have our balanced budget.
Hang on.
Madam Mayor, Councillor Mathers wishes to raise a point of order, which shall be heard immediately. It must refer to a contravention of the standing orders of the law. Would you like? Sorry, what was the point of order, Councillor Mathers? Yeah, that's not a point of order, I'm afraid, and Councillor Gohill did clearly ask the Mayor for her opinion.
Now, once again, Madam Mayor, if I may finish what I have to say without being disturbed by members from the opposite side. We have presented a balanced budget whilst keeping our charges as low as possible, even if that means making some tough decisions. But crucially, Madam Mayor, we have not asked for extra financial support, as 5 Labour councils in London have. Extra financial support, might I add. That means that we would have to surrender our processes, our powers to the government, which would put at risk our libraries, our extra services, our leisure centres, and yes, our parks and services that we push to provide there, but as Councillor Gill mentioned, that I love to talk about so much. So, Madam Mayor, I robustly support this budget, and I don't agree with anything that the councillors on the opposite side have said to object it without even providing their own alternative amendment. Thank you.
Councillor Lever.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Amid the doom and gloom from the opposition, let's have a reality check. Their ability to propose a budget is so limited tonight that they couldn't even come up with an amendment. They object, but they have no proposals as to how you move forward, just that we reconsider. If we take what they've managed in previous years, we would have another £7 million less in our reserves currently. If you add up all their proposals, I know they've been a concoction over many years, but that is what they do. This Conservative administration continues to put residents first. We do believe it is their money we are spending, and therefore the commitment to keep council tax as low as possible and fees and charges as low as possible is something we stand by and will continue to stand by. I would remind members opposite that their Chancellor chose to increase national insurance and not reimburse councils fully, further adding to council pressures. And it is their Chancellor's decisions that have upped the Bank of England's projections on inflation and therefore require us to build more into our budget to allow for those in the future. So let us not have lectures on how it could be done or might be done from an opposition that can't provide any explanation of how. We continue to maintain weekly waste services. We continue to have a full library coverage across this borough. We continue to invest in our parks. We invested in 5 parks last year with refurbishment projects. There are a further 5 in this year's budget. There is also a Chrysalis Fund with investments right across this borough. In terms of services for residents, I will remind the opposition, and Madam Mayor will be joining me this Saturday in Northwood to open the new pop-up library in Northwood to replace the one that had structural failure. We will be in the middle of the borough next month, again with Madam Mayor, opening the new Uxbridge Library, a fantastic new resource for our residents. And we will be in the south of the borough later this year to open the fabulous new West Drayton Leisure Centre. So these are the achievements that we have made, and I fully support this budget and urge all colleagues to do so.
Councillor Bianco.
Well, thank you, Madam Mayor. Can I firstly add my congratulations to Councillor Goddard on his masterful budget speech this evening, setting out both the real challenges that we face as well as the details of how we intend to move forward, and the extensive programme of delivery for our residents over the next 12 months. Listening to the other side tonight, Madam Mayor, you might be forgiven for thinking that this administration has done nothing for its residents over the last year and has no plans for the year ahead. Nonetheless, in my area of responsibility, this year has been a very active year, and next year looks as though it will be even more so. This year, we have bought or developed more than 200 homes, which is no mean achievement. The new Platinum Leisure Centre, as we've all discussed, is well on its way and will be completed in the new financial year. Major SEND projects, which my councillor colleague, Councillor O'Brien, has already mentioned, have been completed, and 2 further major ones. One will be completed this coming year and another one the following year. And the Hayes Regen scheme is well on way now. Phase 1 and 1A will complete in the early part of next financial year, and we will see more than 100 homes coming out of that first phase, with more phases to come afterwards. But what else have we done for our residents this year, and particularly for our tenants? Well, we've installed 275 new kitchens, with a further 324 on order. We've installed 174 new bathrooms, with a further 430 in order. 643 properties have got new double glazing. 36 properties have had new roofs. 182 properties received loft insulation. 647 front entrance and communal fire doors have been replaced, 8,613 gas check certificates have been completed this year, giving us a success rate of 99.97%. 1,399 new boilers have been installed, with a further 286 expected to happen between now and the end of the financial year. And 240 aids and adaptations have been finalised, with a total of 317 elements of special adaptations for disabled people. In addition, we've spent £1 million, for example, on new roofs for 5 schools. So what is this if it's not improvements to the lives of our residents? In 25-26, in addition to what I've mentioned, we will be providing 684 properties with new double glazing, 1,772 properties with new kitchens or bathrooms, 1,324 additional properties will get new boilers, and 1,653 properties in communal areas.
Councillor Bianco,
I beg your pardon.
your
Sorry,
time
Madam.
is up.
There's more to say. I support the motion.
Madam Mayor, we have no other speakers listed, but there was a flurry of hands went up at the beginning. I just want to make sure I haven't missed anybody. Obviously, Councillor Bennett missed, and then it would be Councillor Edwards and Councillor Garner.
Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I wasn't planning to speak. It's quite a rare occasion. But as somebody who is happy to live in this borough, I thought it right that I maybe share for the residents watching at home some of the reasons why I'm happy to live here. We have the second lowest council tax at Band D of any outer London borough, and I don't think we state that point enough or clearly enough. We have some of the lowest fees and charges of London boroughs. We're in the bottom quartile. We have the new West Drayton and Useley Leisure Centre, the new Uxbridge Library, the new Useley Library, new Northwood Library, free waste and recycling collections every week. We have more award-winning open spaces than any other local authority in the country. Fly tipping seems to be a bit of a problem for some Labour members. I suggest maybe you need to put more service requests in, because we have a really good track record of reporting fly tipping and it gets collected the next day. Arguably, we're too good, and we actually make fly tipping more commonplace than it needs to be. On the opposite side of the chamber, I wonder, are you the unhappy people in Hillingdon? You speak so favourably about Ealing, where not only would you pay more council tax, not only would you have less frequent waste collections, not only would you suffer from congestion because of low traffic neighbourhoods, not only would you pay much higher parking charges, the residents of Hillingdon are protected by the Hillingdon Conservative administration. I speak in support of this budget. I think our Labour MP for Uxbridge South Ruislip, Danny Beales, was mentioned earlier, Councillor Sansapuri, as to somebody who's acted very much in the interest of residents in this borough. Let's not forget, he is part of a Labour government that has announced that it wants to demolish villages in our borough and build a runway through them. So we won't take any lectures. We won't take any lectures on how fantastic our MP is. I speak in support of this budget. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Are there any other speakers? No. Councillor Edwards.
Madam Mayor, before Councillor Edwards speaks, I should remind members that he's speaking in his capacity as seconding the original motion and therefore has unlimited speaking time.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Colleagues, we've heard in great detail from Cabinet colleagues and others about the remarkable good value that Hillingdon provides. Let me remind Councillor Sweeting that it's a little bit more than a couple of mini Mars bars between us and Hounslow. The core spending power per dwelling, which is the measure of the resources available to a council, the council tax, business rates and government grants, the level of core spending power per dwelling in Hounslow is 7% higher than in Hillingdon. In Ealing, it is 12% higher. Harrow, 19% higher, and Brent, 28% higher. And we have heard already from Councillor Bennett quite what Hillingdon provides in terms of value, the regularity of its services for this very modest cost. The quality of our services have been recognised and awarded by Ofsted. We do still have amongst the lowest fees and charges. And Councillor Curling, once everybody else has published their council tax rates and all of their fees and charges, we will happily bring back a question to this chamber to ask for an update on how we compare to those neighbours. And we will find that we again are very competitive. We are continuing to maintain our weekly waste collection, which is unlike just about every other London borough. And we are continuing to invest in our local facilities. And there's three I want to mention in particular. The £30 million growth in a care home capacity. This is part of an investment, part of the investment power that we have as a local authority to change the way we deliver services to reduce costs. By bringing this under a special purpose vehicle that we will control, we will reduce the cost of care to the residents that are cared for in this home. It will reduce and will add to the savings target that we're talking about, that you believe is impossible. And it would be impossible for Labour because you cannot think creatively like this. We are going to be investing £25 million this year in the schools facilities for children with SEND. And that again is to change the way we deliver those services to those children, again to reduce cost. And the £20 million on housing development, again, is about increasing the stock. And this is the developments that we know about that are on plans that we are going to spend money on. We have much, much other in our development programme. And Councillor May, that will include the Uxbridge Road. That's already being discussed. That's already being schemed. I do recognise the concern, the challenging financial position that we face, but it is not exceptional. Many, many other local authorities are in the same position. But I want to assure Hillingdon residents that it is the Conservative administration that has the resolve to ensure our financial stability. We have already made those some early difficult decisions, and I've mentioned them: Uxbridge Library, Beck Theatre, Early Years Centre, all opposed by you. All are in the process of being delivered or have been delivered, and they will all provide the same service or better service at lower cost. It is this administration that has the confidence and the ability and the commitment of our senior officers. Obviously, you don't trust them. You don't believe that they will deliver on their undertaking, on their word. We do. We are behind our officer team. It is right to draw attention to the need to deliver savings. We are well on the road to improving our digital systems, moving at pace to link them and eradicate the inconsistencies and errors that incur when the same data is held on separate systems. It is no wonder that people can be unsure of which is the truth. But we are eradicating those inconsistencies, rebasing budgets, cleansing the data to ensure that the service budgets that are now set are realistic and deliverable. We have gone the extra mile to make sure that we are more confident in the deliverability of these budgets. They have been bottom up. They have not been imposed by members on the services. These are services responding to our plea, our requirement to find more efficient, better ways of delivering it. We are delegating the responsibilities for budget management so that each director will be accountable and manage their own budget and deliver the savings. And they are being provided with the performance data through Power BI that you should be aware of, or would be aware of through training sessions, that provide live data on what is happening. That has not been available to this council up until very recently. Our systems development around financial accounting will deliver that sort of financial insight on a far more frequent and quicker time space than has been possible up until now. That is all as a consequence of our investment in digital improvements. And yes, bringing in CIPFA is not a bad idea. It is a good thing. It is so important that we assure our financial sustainability, but we want to quality assure what we are doing. We want to quality assure the systems change that's going on. So please, let's have somebody that's established come in and tell us we are getting it right, or tell us where we need to improve. We're not afraid of that. The savings programme is stretching, but we will deliver it. But that alone is not going to be sufficient. We live in an uncertain world. Donald Rumsfeld, known unknowns, and all of that. We have no idea at this stage where globalisation is going to end up, how the changes with the President Trump are going to impact on the UK economy, or European economy, and ultimately how that will trickle down to the funding for local government. We have no idea how the reduction of the US defence umbrella for Europe will increase the defence spending, and how that will again impact on local government funding. And most concerning for me is the 2025 government spending review, which is due very, very shortly, when we will see the allocation not only to local government, but the distribution between authorities. And if the recovery grant, which was recently announced and allocated, is a standard bearer for what is to come, I'm exceedingly pessimistic for Hillingdon, as I'll explain in a minute. But we recognise that this is a challenge. But you would also, if you'd looked carefully at the budget, have recognised the contingency provisions being made. £10 million, not an insubstantial sum of money. I know ordinarily you just spend them, you raise your money, we draw it off the contingency, but we allocate contingency appropriately to ensure that risk is mitigated. But none of this is sufficient. We must also build reserves, and that is what Councillor Goddard has been driving us to achieve. I, Hillingdon Conservatives, accept responsibility for managing the situation that we are in, but a substantial blame must be laid at government, both past and present. A perfect storm of factors in recent years has led to the severe financial challenges now facing local authorities, including this borough. Sustained funding reductions. You've heard it before, but we must repeat it. Our residents must understand that the per capita funding levels remain more than a fifth lower for local authorities than in 2010. The rising demand for services, adult and children's social care and SEND. Homelessness up by 24% this year alone in this borough. And a significant driver of the rising demand is the population growth in Hillingdon, which we are very pleased is an attractive place to bring up a family and to resettle into, is greater than the average across London boroughs. But the funding has not changed in recognition of that growth. Rising costs due to high inflation and failing markets in key services, particularly children's social care and housing, when effectively the market can charge almost what they like because of the lack of competition and our ability to challenge them. Surprisingly for me, the House of Commons Library very recently published that local authorities are spending, on average across the nation, £53,352 per annum nursing care costs per pensioner. An 82% jump since 2015-16. Has the grant funding for that increased at that rate? No, most certainly not. Temporary housing, up 30% in a year as the investors exit the retail sector. And of course we have increased regulation, which comes with a growing, unrecognised and financial cost. The funding model for local government is outdated, too complex, uncertain, and I believe, and others have argued, fundamentally broken. Urgent reform is needed. How else can you explain 6 councils have been had to take council tax rises above the referendum limit? How else do you explain that in the coming year, the exceptional financial support of 30 councils amounts to £1.3 billion? Are all those councils incompetent? Maybe. Maybe the system. The exceptional financial support directed to local authorities in London this year is increasing 5 times 500% higher than in last year. And nearly 1 in 4 London local authorities need this help. Does this not send a signal that it is a system that is broken? The forecast collective funding shortfall in England has already been mentioned, will be doubling next year. That is not my forecast, that's others. London Council's analysis shows a collective overspend or underfunding in London for the present year, 24-25, of £180 million in adult social care, £150 million in children's social care, £270 million in homelessness, a figure that's doubled in 12 months. An average of £20 million per council, and I believe we were £10 million underspent. Okay. The shortfall for next year is equally as bad. Now let's talk about the recovery grant. This was a new government funding allocated this year, and it was supposedly based on need and resource. So how much was demanded of a council and their ability to pay, their core spending power. Councillor Sweeting, Ealing received, it's lucky we can use the computers now that we've gone paper-based, it says holding this piece of paper. Ealing received 1.1 million. Hounslow, £1 million. How much do you think Hillingdon got? Nothing. In fact, 15 London councils received this grant funding. How many of them do you think were Conservative? None. And surprisingly, every single one of these authorities, every one of them, had more resource, a higher core spending power per dwelling than Hillingdon. The Labour government message is very clear. Spend more, get more. Let us also look at the revenue support grant that the government have issued for 25-26 to some of our neighbouring boroughs. This is unring-fenced funding. Hounslow, £12.177 million. Ealing, £21.798 million. Hillingdon, £8.66 million. But we have 10% more residents than Hounslow. Oh, it's a few mini-Mars bars. Situation has been made much worse by the Labour government actions. The job-destroying autumn budget, half of the firms surveyed said that measures would increase prices or cut staff, while a third said they would lower wages. The Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development survey that very recently have said a quarter of employers plan to make redundancies in the coming 3 months. And the February Bank of England report on the state of the economy pointed specifically to Rachel Reeves' rise in employer national insurance contributions in October as a dampener on growth. Last week, the Retail Jobs Allowance, Tesco, Marks and Spencer's, B&Q amongst them, said that there's a perfect storm of additional costs which will see 300,000 jobs disappear by 2030. We know from experience that rising in unemployment leads to a rising in demand for council support services and a reduction in our council tax cost. It is going to be an unfunded demand on our budget, courtesy of the Labour government. Hear, hear. They've gone further. They've broken their promise. The promise was we would protect hard-working families. The Bank of England explicitly spelled out that it was the lowest earners who would carry the heaviest burden of the autumn budget. It is resulting in price increases, energy, food. The Bank of England forecast rise of 3.7 this year, not returning to target until 2027. Their promise to protect local authority services. They would compensate councils for the direct cost of the increase in national insurance charge for employers. But they decided not to do that and give us only 80%, a little bit of a black hole. The Treasury warned by the adult social care directors that the lack of funding for increase in the ERNIC, the employers' national insurance contributions, risk suppliers handing back contracts to the council. And ERNIC has driven up further the average cost of care to local authorities. The House of Commons Library, as I said, has talked around the cost of nursing care at £53,352. The resolution cost of care being kicked down the road, with Casey Commission not reporting until 2028. Let's not deal with the problem today. Let's think about it. Let's talk about it. That is a typical Labour intervention. We would rather get on and do something about it. The spending review of next month, well, it's coming. The Office for Budget Responsibility is posed to downgrade its growth forecast next month, and to meet the fiscal rules, the Chancellor will need to raise taxes and or cut spending in the fiscal update in the 26th of March. Unprotected departments, including local government and policing, face further cuts. So in answer to Councillor Gill of why the delay in our budget, well, it's quite simple. The delay is caused wholly by the government, because it was only in very early February that they announced their decision not to fully fund the rise in employers' national insurance contributions to the council, adding a hole in our budget which had to be filled. And it was only just after then that the Bank of England forecast inflation to be much higher, creating an even bigger hole in our budget that had to be filled. The need to propose the charge for garden waste is a direct consequence of Rachel Reed's budget in not compensating the councils and not the higher than expected inflation. The Society of Local Authority and Chief Executives and Senior Managers and the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy concluded the funding system for local authorities is not only broken, but increasingly clear that council funding has become disconnected from the needs of different areas, and arguably none more so than in Hillingdon, and that's because of Heathrow. Who would have thought, when we heard on the news of the Prime Minister's decision to arrange for the return of the Chagos Islands to Mauritius, would impact our borough? Who would have thought it? Well, by the 11th of February, 36 households had returned under their British passport to their mother nation and had prayed at the council office saying, "We need support, please." 36 households with children that we have a duty to house. The cost of temporary housing, support allowances, officer time, and ongoing housing costs once their habitual residency test for 6 months is established is estimated to be £818,000 for this year. Another hole. We are modelling the cost of £1.2 million as we expect further arrivals from the Chagos Islands. There is no financial support at all presently from the government, and the full cost of this is being passed on to the Hillingdon residents. This is completely and utterly unacceptable that a national responsibility should be funded by our residents. The support provided to children and young people seeking asylum has presented a net cost to the borough of £1.7 million in 2022-23 and £3.4 million in 2023-24. We are pleased to accept the responsibility to look after these young people, but it is right that we are funded by government to do so, and that Hillingdon's residents shouldn't carry the cost of people arriving at Heathrow and then appearing at our offices. The government intention to speed up the processing of asylum applications will have a direct impact on Hillingdon. The approved families and vulnerable will present earlier to the local authority, which will be an additional burden. At the end of last week, I understand that very close to 1 in 5 of all asylum seekers in London are accommodated in Hillingdon, in our hotels. We take no issue with that. We are welcoming them. We wish to support them. but we need the financial support to be able to do so. That number is double the number of asylum seekers than the limit set by the Home Office. The doubling of presentations to this year, 693 families from this asylum, and it is getting worse. The duty to children and young vulnerable and vulnerable adults, my apologies, we will have to address. But the majority at the moment do not presently need anything further than advice and signposting. You might say, that's great. But is it any wonder that our rough sleeping is going up? Because that is where we are ending up seeing them again. The cost from immigration as a result of a port authority is, to me, very clear evidence of a need for a new financial settlement for Hillingdon. And the repeated failure of government ministers of both parties to resolve this underfunding is causing me, to consider what other legal options we have available to us. But our task is to run the borough as it is, not as we wish it were or the funding was given to us. The Conservatives' unity and resolve and courage to do this in the face of profound financial challenge to local authorities. The budget protects services from cuts. It keeps cost increases to our council tax below our neighbouring boroughs. It keeps fees and charges below our neighbouring boroughs. But being mindful of the cost to residents, we are aware that energy bills are going up. We are aware of water bills that are going up. But because of the factors that I have spoken about, the broken government promise and the now increased inflation, we have no option but to consider the charge for garden waste, which will be consulted on shortly. We have fought for years to retain that as a free service, but it is no longer sustainable. It is right that the principle of the user paying for the service. A sizable proportion of our council taxpayers do not have private gardens and make no use of that service, but presently they are paying for it. Then there will be a new cost, but there will be no change in service level. It will still be weekly, it will still be the same quantity, and we will continue to be better value than other boroughs. Had we stubbornly stuck to our guns, it might have made us feel good, but it would have left us with no capacity to absorb unforeseen shocks. The state of the world politics, our government, and particularly the Chancellor, give me no confidence that such a shock is not just around the corner, and that local government funding, or more specifically, outer London authority funding of a Conservative colour, will be squeezed yet again. It's been a particularly difficult budget this year. My thanks go to the corporate management team for the development of their savings programme. My thanks also go to the finance team, because I know of the many hours they've worked very rapidly after the late announcements by government, many times at the weekends. And my particular thanks goes to the Cabinet member, Councillor Goddard, who's helped guide me through this process and ensure that we have brought to you a very sound budget. Madam Mayor, I am pleased to move this budget. I am saddened that it is in the form it is, but that is a consequence not of our making, but of a broken funding system for local authorities. Yeah. Thank you.
Madam, I just wanted to make a point of clarification on what Councillor Gohill had mentioned about Merton Council having a higher deficit than ours.
Can I just explain? This is a point of personal explanation where
Yes.
you think something has been misunderstood by a member about something you said.
Yes, I have the Merton Council's papers in front of me. Page 162 is 50 million.
Sorry, if I could just explain. If you feel a member has misunderstood something you said in your speech, that is a point of personal explanation. It's about your speech. So if you have to make that point.
So their forecast is 50 million, ours is 68. I mean, Councillor Gohil might not be a maths teacher, but 50 is definitely less than 68.
Councillor Goddard.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. A great deal has been said this evening, and I won't prolong this much. But there are a number of points of substance that really must be put right. Okay? First of all, I find it absolutely disgraceful that the party opposite is trying to suggest that this budget was thrown together, does not have substance. I must tell you, Madam Mayor, that the finance team and the corporate management team have worked long hours, evenings, weekends, in great amounts of detail to put this budget together. It is carefully assembled. Is it the budget that I would love to see? No, of course it's not, but it confronts reality and it is the right thing to do. Okay. It saddens me as well to reflect on the fact that the party opposite sees a political opportunity and has gone for it. Okay? It is an inescapable fact that we have cost pressures arising from demand, from inflation. It is an inescapable fact that government funding has shrunk in real terms, as I said earlier, by 70%. Yet, if you listen to the party opposite, none of that counts. None of it happens. None of it is worthy of consideration. The final point I want to make is that our Section 151 officers' comments in the Section 25 report have been reflected on in great detail. Essentially, what he brought to us were, well, given the situation, there are three options. Okay? You can either go for exceptional financial support, and that in effect is a sticking plaster, because actually all you're doing is kicking the can down the road. You're not actually solving the core problem. We rejected that option. The second option is to increase council tax. That fundamentally does not sit well with us. That is contrary to our policy of giving a great deal for residents. Okay? The third option is the one that we have chosen to solve our own problems. What Mr. Ennis did not say, and let's be clear about this, is he did not say, well, of course, the other option is Section 114. Okay? And in fact, I will go as far as to tell you that he has said to me that actually he does not see Hillingdon as a Section 114 council. Now, that is probably a breach of confidence between him and me, and he will probably give me a hard time for it afterwards. But Madam Mayor, I am telling you that. And I think hearing that from somebody of his experience is actually something that I take great confidence for. So therefore, Madam Mayor, I absolutely support this budget. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, if I just may make one clarification. And I think this is important. I think if the Conservative group listen to this, they will appreciate that the importance of this. In the debate earlier, and I believe by Councillor Gohill, it was stated that the Labour group thought that this budget was illegal. I would just like to correct the record. We do actually believe and accept that this is a legal budget. That was never part of our argument. I just wanted to make that plain, that we do think it's a legal budget. I didn't want to make the intervention when the councillor was speaking because she was being interrupted, so I thought I'd leave it right to the last moment.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We'll move to the hopefully final act of the evening, which is the named vote on adopting the budget. So I'm going to ask each member in turn if they're voting for the 17 Cabinet recommendations on the budget as set out on pages 2 to 5, moved by Councillor Goddard, seconded by Councillor Edwards. Voting for that, against it or abstaining. Councillor Abbey.
Against.
Councillor Ahmad Walana.
For the budget.
Thank you. Councillor Banerjee. Councillor Bassett. Councillor Bennett. Councillor Batt. Councillor Bianco. Councillor Bridges. Councillor Burles. Councillor Burrows. Councillor Chubadar. Councillor Curling. Councillor Davies. Councillor Dennis. Councillor Dott. Councillor Edwards. Councillor Farley, Councillor Gaelic, Councillor Garg, Councillor Gill, Councillor Goddard, Councillor Gohill, Councillor Higgins, Councillor Islam, Councillor Judge, Councillor Kaur, Councillor Lavery, Councillor Lewis, Councillor Makwana, Councillor Mand, Councillor Martin, Councillor Mathers, Councillor Douglas Mills, Councillor Richard Mills, Councillor Nelson, Councillor Nelson West, Councillor O'Brien, Councillor Palmer, Councillor Punja, Councillor Riley, Councillor Sansapuri, Councillor Singh, Councillor Smallwood, Councillor Sweeting, Councillor Tuckwell, Mr Deputy Mayor. And Madam Mayor. Thank you. Madam Mayor, that budget is adopted by 27 votes to 20.